All right, so I'm going to talk about something that might be a little uncomfortable to some people. And so I'll give a kind of a warning. I'm a Helm core maintainer, but this is me just proposing an idea. It's not something that's planned for Helm 3 or anything, but a discussion point to get us going a little bit. I want to talk about measuring how Helm is used. If you don't know me from yesterday, here's a quick slide. Just kind of shows some of the things that I've been working on. These slides will be online, so you can track me down later. I do Helm and charts and SIG apps and Glide and a bunch of other things over time. So Helm interest is growing. Don't worry about the dotted line in the end. Actually, right now in trends, everything related to Kubernetes has this dotted line of incomplete data going way down in searches. But the overall Google trend is going up for Helm, Kubernetes, and everything, and Helm in particular here. And Helm has a lot of users. This is the number of people in Slack, right? So you take a room this size of people who come to to talk about Helm here, right? And then you've got the number of people in Slack. And so the people who contribute is much smaller than the people who speak up and have their voice, which is still just a fraction of the number of people who use things. So I have access, I went and I grabbed some numbers, and unique downloaders for something from the community charts repo in 2018, so a little over a month and a half, is over 50,000 uniques, right? That's not a small number. There are a lot of people who use Helm. And, well, what do we know about them, right? How do those people actually use Helm? What features are they using? What flags do they use? Which things have we baked in and documented that people never use, right? We can talk about security and the files around signing things. How many people use those? Is it, people who don't speak up, or are people using these? What things are in use, and what do we know? As of right now, we have a pretty incomplete picture. We've gone around, we've asked people, the Helm core maintainers who've been around for a while, like to sit down with people at Reddit and other companies and ask them things. How are you using it? What features are you using? But that's a really small, incomplete picture from a vocal crowd rather than the long tail. So you start to think about, well, how do people solve this problem in general? Well, if you're a website, you go there, you get stalked. Each of these has analytics on them, right? In this case, it's all Google Analytics, but it could be Omniture or many of the other packages. If you're running a website or a web application, you've got analytics on it to find out how people are using what you're doing, right? I mean, does anybody build a website where they don't look at this or even inject it, even if they never look at it? It's just a common thing. But really, it's not just websites. Most of our desktop apps now do this too, right? I've installed things like Little Snitch, which is a Mac app you can do that looks at all the connections coming and going from your computer. And one of the things that I found is most of your applications phone home. And they tell stuff about it. Some of them, I remember when Chrome put out the policy saying they're going to phone home with data and send stuff back just for your browser. And a lot of things phone home and send data out because they're capturing analytics on how people use things and what they're doing and the features they use so they can make decisions on how they're going to develop things. If you don't want to invest in a feature that nobody's using. If there's an area that's a rough spot or common, maybe you want to make it easier. And they look into those things. On occasion, they'll even ask you if you want these, but most of the time they don't. But really, does it stop there? Because it's not just companies and UI apps. It can be open source projects as well. Here's an example of two of them. Yeoman, which is a project in the Node.js community to do generation of things. In fact, I think at KubeCon, somebody had a talk on doing, or somewhere I saw a talk on somebody doing this to generate Kubernetes objects using Yeoman. And they ask you at install, do you want, to give analytics back? And you can look at the Google Cloud SDK, which asks you the same thing, right? They ask you, do you want to supply this information? It's an opt-in approach. And in fact, what I got to say in big words is if you do this in open source, it has to be opt-in. It's one of those things where you can't just silently do it the way most of our applications do it because open source and in our communities like this, there's a lot of people who don't handle that well, myself included. And so it has to be opt-in. I couldn't make the words fit bigger on here and have the space because I think it's a big deal to say opt-in. But it's one of those things where it's useful and people are doing it. But you get into these situations too where you got to look at things like how do you handle doing this in a CI system, right? How do you can't stop and ask along the way in CI. Well, it turns out that a lot of people are already doing this, so there are tools and methodologies exist. This right here is a tool that is, you only see it's got like 100 and some stars, right? Small tool, but it's able to detect, is it a CLI? This is the Node.js module that does this. But if you actually go look at it, it has 5 million downloads in the last week, right? So few stars, massive use because a lot of projects are silently using this to be able to detect when they're in CI, do something differently, and maybe opt out of asking for analytics. There are ways of doing this that can be forward compatible and dealing with CI systems and not doing this, and yet prompt for opt-in to ask if they'll give feedback so we can better learn what we need to make decisions as we go forward. So I really just want to ask, how do people use Helm? And should we start measuring it? That's it. Thank you.